For years, women have been making strides, stepping out of the shadow of men to show a different form of equality. Different, but equal. Men weren't created to dominate women. We were created to be partners, to be complementary. So the woke movement has produced something catastrophic for women. Specific men are now redefining womanhood, and women are helping them do it in the name of inclusivity. Women have a tendency to have a lot of empathy for so-called victims because a lot of women see themselves as victims coming out of an oppressive patriarchal system. So who are the men who are subtly erasing womanhood? Men who claim to be women. And along with them, they came up with a new concept called Transmaxxing. So my name is Nefreteri. Currently, I'm focusing on the gender wars and how both genders have sustained losses. This is part 2 of 5 in my women series, and today's focus is how trans ideology is destroying womanhood. So let's quickly set the stage for how we got here because it is quite linear. So the broader trans ideology is the claim that gender identity, not biological sex, is the defining criterion for being a woman or being a man. So trans ideology for some reason took people by surprise after same-sex marriage was voted in favor of in 2015 with the landmark case of Obergefell. But logical people would understand that by redefining marriage and claiming the outcomes of same-sex couples raising kids would be the same as heterosexual, then obviously the roles of man and woman and what it means to be them would be gone. So there would be nothing innate to being a man, a husband, or a father anymore, and then there'd be nothing innate to being a woman, a wife, or a mother. So enter in trans. There are no longer 2 genders. It's about how you feel inside. Gender is now an identity, no longer a biological fact. And because it's based on a feeling, we can change our identities whenever we want, right? So how did women specifically get targeted? Well, there has been a great feminization of Western culture, and with it the rise of victimhood, specifically from therapy culture. So sitting around and talking about your feelings and emotions would be stuff girls would have done with their friends, but it was pushed into the mainstream to people, just normal everyday people in everyday life now just ruminating on their problems, and now the most important thing in your life is how you feel. So inclusivity is fascinating because it's technically self-defeating, and it can even be parasitic if it's not based on superficial things. If it goes too deep, that's when it can become a parasite. So 2 things can happen with inclusiveness. One would be assimilation. So this new group that comes in, it must adapt to the dominant structure. America was always considered a culture of assimilation. The other option is accommodation, and that's when the host group dilutes its own identity to accommodate the outsider, essentially eroding its own distinctiveness. So the inclusivity of trans people has essentially just been giving rights to trans people while erasing the original people and structures. And quite frankly, that's what many people want to do, especially women. They want to erode traditional patriarchal systems. So because of the unique biological functions of a woman's body, women have been affected much worse than men have. So of the 2 genders, women were the only ones capable of being pregnant. But then it became birthing persons, chest feeders. Biological women transitioning to men tried to show that men can be pregnant too. From trans surgery, I find one of the most demeaning things I've ever heard in my life, front holes. That's the inclusive language for men becoming women. Menstruating people and products, because apparently menstruation was never a biological function indicative of women. So ask yourselves, why are we erasing the word woman to make room for men pretending to be us? So the same culture that used to tell women that we were weak for being women is now telling us that we don't even exist as women. These men are claiming womanhood when women, we never got a chance to. So they didn't live through being told, you punch like a girl, period pain, whispering to your friends like, do you have a tampon? Or being devalued for femininity. Yet they claim womanhood without ever paying the cost that real women have ever had to. How many girls like me hated pink because when we were younger, pink was a girl's color, but now you absolutely love it. I love pink, right? The millennial pink. So the insults continue. Just recently, Glamour's UK Women of the Year 2025 issue was filled with nothing but biological men. So one has to ask, what message does that send to real women? That womanhood is now a costume that you can put on whenever you want? And then look at the outfits that they're wearing. They're always crop tops and mini skirts, and the makeup and the hair has to be done a certain kind of way. With that means womanhood is a costume. Now, J.K. Rowling, she's been great. She has been a woman's activist for a while now, and she recently slammed Emma Watson, who, because she's a celebrity, can say whatever she wants without implications and repercussions. Emma was in opposition to J.K. Rowling years ago when the trans movement was really at its height, and she came to the defense of trans people. J.K. Rowling came to the defense of women. Now the tables have kind of turned in America. There's a different wind in the air, and so Emma Watson wants to reach out, not really because she cares about J.K. Rowling, but because of, the movement and the zeitgeist currently. This is what J.K. Rowling said to Emma Watson. I wasn't a millionaire at 14. I lived in poverty while writing the book that made Emma famous. I therefore understand from my own life experience what the trashing of women's rights in which Emma has so enthusiastically participated means to women and girls without her privileges. So Rowling, though rich, didn't forget her past. And so she gets it. The elite women who are applauding this inclusivity and erasure, they'll be fine, right? But the single mother, the poor woman, the vulnerable one, the girl in college on the streets, those are the women who are losing their safe spaces, and we're losing our language as women. So instead of just calling all women crazy, one has to ask, why do women fall for this? And it's really because they get caught in an empathy trap. It's where compassion overrides discernment. Another way of putting it, it would be a pathological altruism. What ends up happening is they are doing harm in the name of doing good. By giving somebody else rights, we're actually taking it from ourselves. So we think that inclusivity is kindness, but when inclusivity means self-erasure, that's not kindness, that becomes compliance. So contrast this with male psychology, or the male psychology that I would say when I was growing up. Men for the longest time did not give away their identity to make other people feel comfortable. But women do, and it's killing us culturally. Don't worry, boys. When I am done with this series, I will get to the men, and I will address the identities that men have taken on. Speaking of men, in comes transmaxxing. So some men have now realized that there are social rewards in being a victim, especially a female victim. And so that's where we enter into transmaxxing, which is recognizing that by transitioning, you will gain net positive life improvements as passing as a female. Right? This obviously started with Leah Thomas, a failed male swimmer who clearly claimed to be a woman for advantages and started placing number one, stealing medals from women and trophies, as well as just hanging out in a locker room with a swim team. Unbelievable. Now, in that case, I actually found something called the Transmaxxing Manifesto, and it was unbelievable. But this is actually rhetoric coming from males, probably more so incels, but you're going to hear it when I read it. So this guy, whoever wrote this, said the male gender role is broken. Let's face it, if you present as male, there's exactly one personality that will earn you social approval: Chad. Assertive, dominant, successful. Nobody will be impressed by a male that is meek, submissive, and struggling. Such males are not considered trailblazers. They're just derided as incels, neats. Nobody is offering an actual solution to this. Tradcons just tell you to man up. TERFs tell you to just abolish gender. Liberals deny this reality altogether. By embracing girl mode, you actually become free to be your authentic self without shame. I think this entire thing, I'm not even going to read the rest, this whole thing is shameful. But this guy wrote this because he thinks that men have been erased and that it's now more advantageous to be a woman. And as I said, I will get to the male problems later, but this is just completely wrong. And for this ideology to even exist now means that there are men who have taken advantage of this outside of just Leah Thomas. So it's not just leftist material. There are people on the right doing this to get out of male prisons and going into women's prisons. So there are men who are not claiming claiming to have a mental disorder. They're just claiming to be a woman, and then they're going into women's prisons and they're raping them. This has been happening in Rikers Island. It happened in Germany. It's becoming too common, and people don't know how to fight it without affecting the trans movement. So being a woman now gets you visibility, empathy, sponsorships now, apparently, without any of the biological reality that defines womanhood. But I find transmaxxing to actually just be colonization. It's men literally just colonizing the last territory that they didn't own, and that was womanhood itself. So to tie this into empathy, they couldn't have done this if they really didn't get women's help with the compassion. It would never have gained the traction that it has, with women being afraid to stick up for themselves and say, no, I'm a woman. No, you can't just be in my locker room. No, you can't just go out and buy a set of boobs and call yourself a woman. But women were very, very open to this. So for those who don't think this means anything, what happens to a generation of girls when womanhood stops meaning anything and then just becomes a costume? Now, there is a flip side to this. So you may wonder why trans men or biological women aren't causing as much of a ruckus. And I wondered it myself, and so I looked it up. It's because it doesn't fit the narrative. A woman wanting to be a man in the patriarchy gives like Mulan vibes, right? It's admirable, it's even heroic, but it doesn't disrupt the system. So it doesn't prove the narrative that gender is fluid. What it does is it just looks like a woman who's trying to survive in a man's world. But when men become women, that's when this whole ideological kind of machine, it just kind of lights up. It drives the narrative of dismantling the patriarchy, flipping power from men to women, and then blurring the boundaries of what womanhood even means. So trans men, biological women, don't challenge the hierarchy. So trans women, biological men, they're rewriting it. And that's why one group gets the spotlight while the other stays in the shadow. Trans women, biological men, are actually a threat to women. Trans men, biological women, not really that much of a threat to men, the patriarchy, anything at all, really. Trans women are validating the ideology of a self-defined identity and gender liberation. Trans men, it just looks as a woman who's trying to escape, and that many women would rather stop being a woman altogether, that it would just be more advantageous to be a man. So for those who are empathetic, like what are some solutions, or how should we even think about this going forward? Well, first, ladies, it's really time to reclaim some discernment. I think that people need to start asking themselves, well, does this person really have good intentions? Can we recognize a person who has struggles versus somebody who's actually predatory, who wants to hurt women? Can we actually recognize that everybody is different in this category? Some people are products of their youth. It was their parents who got them into this. And some people are unhappy with themselves. They definitely need to see a therapist of some kind. And then there are just some straight up predators. So we can be empathetic, we can be compassionate, but that does not mean self-erasure. It means speaking to somebody with truth and love. For people who really are struggling, we can support them in their struggle without denying our own identities, without erasing ourselves. Inclusivity does not work when we start redefining things like gender. Evolution, creationism, anythingism. There's two genders. And we've always known this. So it's out of control to think that one person can just switch to something else because of how they feel inside. That is a person who needs to see somebody. Women, we did not fight for centuries to get where we are just to hand womanhood over to whoever decide to ask in the name of inclusivity. This isn't about hate. This is about setting up boundaries. You can love a person and just say no. You just can't, you can't do that. You can't be a woman. But I do love you. Please get help. We don't have to erase ourselves just to love another human being. So thank you for watching, guys. Let's talk about it. Tell me something in the comments. What are your thoughts? How do you think that we can start changing this without losing our humanity? Actually having compassion on people, but still, saying no? Do you even think that that's possible? Leave your thoughts below, and if you are following this series, hit like and subscribe for more, especially for part 3, which will be the oppression of women in Islam and why the modern feminist does not talk about it. Thanks, guys.
Me on the floor, and let's see what you can do. Is it just for show? Say, girl, can that body move?